Blindly, joyfully, the people cheered the Kaiser, eager to follow a leader on the renewed march to conquest. Thus, in August of 1914, Carl Schmitt of the second generation, indoctrinated with 150 years of Prussian tradition, marched off to set the world aflame.
The German foreign minister in the Zimmermann telegram invited Mexico to join the war as Germany's ally against the United States. In return, the Germans would finance Mexico's war and help it recover the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Woodrow Wilson's address to the United States, he says, "Whereas the Imperial German government has committed repeated acts of war against the government of the people of the United States of America, therefore be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that the state of war between the United States and the Imperial German government, which has thus been thrust upon the United States, is hereby formally declared, and that the President be, and he is hereby authorized and directed to employ the entire naval and military forces of the United States and the resources of the government to carry on war against the Imperial German government and to bring the conflict to a successful termination. All the resources of the country are hereby pledged by the Congress of the United States of America."
Had he not been taught, did he not believe that whatever Germany demands is right? Even when he marched through Belgium, dismissing a solemn neutrality pact as a scrap of paper. Even when German scientists developed poison gases in violation of international agreements which Germany had solemnly signed. Even when, in violation of all the agreed codes of war, German U-boats deliberately sent to the bottom unarmed merchant ships without warning.
April 1917, here's German Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann Hollweg's thoughts about the prospect of war with the United States. Germany never has had the slightest intention of attacking the United States of America and does not have such intention now. It's never desired war against the United States of America and does not desire it today. How did these things develop? More than once we told the United States that we made unrestricted use of the submarine weapon, expecting that England could be made to observe in her policy of blockade the laws of humanity and of international agreements. This blockade policy, this I expressly recall, has been called illegal and indefensible by President Wilson and the Secretary of State Lansing. Our expectations, which we maintained during 8 months, have been disappointed completely. England not only did not give up her illegal and indefensible policy of the blockade, but uninterruptedly intensified it. England, together with her allies, arrogantly rejected the peace offers made by us and our allies and proclaimed her war aims, which aim at our annihilation and that of our allies. Then we took unrestricted submarine warfare into our hands. Then we had to, for our defense, if the American nation considers this a cause for which to declare war against the German nation, with which it has lived in peace for more than 100 years, that this action warrants an increase of bloodshed, we shall not have to bear the responsibility for it. The German nation, which feels neither hatred nor hostility against the United States of America, shall also bear and overcome this.
Thus, what his father had done to France, to Denmark, to Austria, this second generation Carl Schmitt attempted to do to the world. Our own President Wilson said, "I was, for a little while, unable to believe that such things would in fact be done by any government that had subscribed to the human practices of civilized nations." But only when we realized that we we were directly threatened. Only when every protest had been ignored and Germany had carried the war right into our home waters did we feel compelled to fight.
In 1917, the National German-American Alliance, an organization that had campaigned against the United States' involvement in the war, had its charter withdrawn. Some schools stopped teaching German as a foreign language, and radio stations were encouraged not to play the music of German composers. A large number of German-language newspapers, starved of advertising dollars, were also forced to close. On April 4th, 1918, a mob on April 4th captured Robert Paul Prager, a coal miner, at his home, paraded him, and made him kiss the American flag. Robert Paul Prager was charged with talking shit about America and President Wilson. So a mob had gained entrance to the jail, and they found Robert Paul Prager hiding in the basement. The police stood aside as the mob marched him to an area referred to as Moore Heights. After allowing Robert Paul Prager to write a brief letter to his parents in Germany and pray, he was hanged in front of a crowd of 200 people at 12:30 a.m. on April 5th. He was denied the United Mine Workers membership because not only was he German, but he also was unmarried, stubbornly argumentative, given to socialist doctrines, blind in one eye, and he looked like a spy to the miners. Robert Paul Prager was hiding under a pile of rubbish in the basement. Some of the miners who had confronted him in Maryville were drinking in Collinsville, Illinois that night, and they decided to go after Prager in his home. So they dragged Robert Paul Prager into the street, and they stripped him of his shoes and his outer clothing, and they draped him with an American flag. Prager had once threw a baker into jail for not allowing Prager to wave an American flag, and Robert Paul Prager had signed up for the Navy but was denied for medical reasons. But in spite of his pro-American views, Robert Paul Prager was murdered anyways. Many of the mob were arrested and a jury let them go free. Robert Paul Prager was led to the tree barefooted. He was led through the streets by the end of a rope. And upon the moment before he was hanged, Robert Paul Prager was asked if he had anything to say. Yes, he replied in broken English, "I would like to pray." He then fell to his knees, clasped his hands to his breast, and prayed for 3 minutes in German. Without another word, the noose was placed about Robert Paul Prager's neck, and the body was pulled 10 feet into the air by 100 or more hands which had grasped the rope. Before praying, Prager wrote a letter to his parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carl Henry Prager, Preston, Germany. It follows. Dear parents, I must this day, the 5th of April, 1918, die. Please pray for me, my dear parents. This is my last letter. Your dear son, Robert Paul Prager, hanged in a tree, just like thousands of black folks.
The next war. That is why you occupy Germany. To make that next war impossible. No easy job. In battle, you kept your wits about you. Don't relax that caution now. The Nazi party may be gone, but Nazi thinking, Nazi training, and Nazi trickery remain.
The motto of World War I was "Hell's too good for the Hun." The Creel Commission worked overtime with their anti-German propaganda. During World War I and World War II, there were lots of anti-German propaganda. England was just being as aggressive and just as provocative with their military as Germany has been. The British were preventing any ships from leaving Germany by controlling the seas, and that's why the German U-boats were so devastating to them. And the devastating punishment Germany received in World War I is what brought about Hitler for the Second World War, when FDR united with Stalin, a man who had killed 30 million plus of his own people through executions or starvations. The fear produced by the propaganda worked since most Germans lost their native language. By the first generation of immigrants, German names had dropped the word German from their names. German Security Bank became Security Bank, for example, or they were completely altered. German names were Anglo-Americanized. Schmidt became Smith. Moeller became Miller. And Johann became John. Katharina became Kate. The Grubschover name lost the umulated 2 dots over their O. They also limited themselves from using the German language in public places, especially in churches. Sauerkraut had to be called Liberty Cabbage. Dachshund became Liberty Pups. German measles became Liberty Measles. Hamburgers became Liberty Sandwiches. And this is similar to how the United States had declared French fries freedom fries in the early 2000s. 5 days after Robert Prager was hung in Collinsville, Illinois, on April 9th, 1918, the Cincinnati City Council changed the German street names. German Street was changed to English Street. Bismarck Street was changed to Montreal Street. Berlin Street converted to Woodrow Street. Bremen Street converted to Republic Street. Brunswick Street converted to Edgecliff Point. Frankfurt Street converted to Connecticut Avenue. Hamburg Street to Stonewall Street. Hanover Street to Yukon Street. Habsburg Street to Merrimack Street. Schumann Street to Meredith Street. Vienna Street to Panama Street. And Humboldt Street to Taft Road. The Louisville and Cincinnati libraries removed books that were written in German from their shelves. The Louisville and Cincinnati libraries removed books that were written in German off their shelves. Some German immigrants in the United States were even tried, convicted, and imprisoned on charges of sedition, merely for refusing to swear allegiance to the United States war effort. The FBI arrested 10,000 Germans during World War I, and the FBI were surveilling Albert Einstein. People with German-sounding last names were persecuted. German-owned businesses faced boycotts. In towns founded by German immigrants, German street names were changed. A Minnesota man was tarred and feathered when he was heard praying in German to a dying woman. At least one man was hanged merely because he was believed to be of German descent. High schools dropped German classes, and schools in majority German areas were required to teach only in English. In Iowa, a 1918 law prohibited speaking any language other than English in public. In June 1918, a bill was introduced in the House of Representatives by Representative John M.C. Smith with the aim to wipe out all German names from the map of the United States. The Justice Department attempted to prepare a list of all German aliens, counting approximately 480,000 of them, and more than 4,000 of whom were imprisoned in 1917 to 1918. The allegations included spying for Germany or endorsing the German war effort. Thousands were forced to buy war bonds to show their loyalty. The Red Cross barred individuals with German last names from joining in fear of sabotage. Orchestras replaced music by German composer Wagner. With French composer Berlioz. The town, Berlin, Michigan, was changed to Marne, Michigan, in order to honor those who had fought in the Battle of Marne. In Iowa, the 1918 Babel Proclamation, like the Tower of Babel, was passed, where the governor prohibited all foreign languages in schools and public places. Eugene Debs was put in prison for 10 years because of what he said about World War I. He wound up getting 1 million votes while he was sitting in prison as a socialist candidate for U.S. president. About World War I, Eugene Debs said this: "Wars throughout history have been waged for conquest and plunder. In the Middle Ages, when the feudal lords who inhabited the castles whose towers may still be seen along the Rhine concluded to enlarge their domains, to increase their power, their prestige, and their wealth, they declared war upon one another. But they themselves did not go to war any more than the modern feudal lords, the barons of Wall Street, go to war. The feudal barons of the Middle Ages, the economic predecessors of the capitalists of our day, declared all the wars, and the miserable serfs fought all the battles. The poor, ignorant serfs had been taught to revere their masters, to believe that when their masters declared war upon one another, it was their patriotic duty to fall upon one another and to cut one another's throats for the profits and glory of the lords and the barons who had held them in contempt.